Victorum gaming fans and SPQR fans. So we're back. We're starting a new series of faction scenario review videos. So we've already covered Athens in our first series of 3. This next series will cover the missions or scenarios for the Britons. And as you can see here, so every faction in the game, really cool part about SPQR is, if you're playing campaigns or just heads up, there's so many different scenarios for you to play, so really you shouldn't be playing the same game twice. But basically in scenarios, if you don't want to play the generic ones, or the campaign, you don't want to play the generic ones, you can, if you're the attacker, you can try and play some of your own faction's special missions here. So we got Terror of the Tribes, Wrath of Britons, and Peace Between Enemies. So the first video today, we're going to take a look at Terror of the Tribes, and then in our next 2 videos, obviously, the other 2 scenarios. So, and again, if you haven't already, go check out our video on just the faction review for the Britons, so you have an idea of like what we think are some of the better units, better ways to play them, and all that fun stuff. So, taking a look here then, Terror of the Tribes. So the strength of the tribes in Britain was as much in their reputation as their spears, and the chieftains knew full well that a battle could be won before it started if the enemy could be terrified. Before battle, the warriors of Britain would often form up into units and then shout, insult, and torment their enemies, hoping to shake their confidence with a display of raw strength and aggression. So, all right, deployment-wise, looking at the board here, so Britons do seem to have a little bit more space here with a little bit less for the defenders, and they're showing basically like an 18-inch separation here. So, as is normal here, both players have the same number of denarii. The enemy player is the defender, while the Briton player is the attacker. So, key thing there. Again, certain things trigger off of being attacker. When we're talking about like certain special characters, not traits, but talents and all that fun stuff. So, setup. The defending player deploys all his models first. The Briton player then deploys all his models next. No unit in the Britons may be placed so that's more than 6 inches away from at least 2 others, and all units must have line of sight to at least 1 enemy unit. So something to consider there. So definitely some caveats. Depending on how the terrain is set up, you do have to keep that in mind. And then the Briton player has the first phase. So again, as we like to talk about here, so some of the things to consider, if you're the Briton player, you do get to see sort of how the defender deploys here. They are forced to deploy first in front of you, so you can kind of, they have to lay all their cards on the table basically, and you can kind of deploy accordingly. So, if you have some good matchups, you definitely want to deploy accordingly there. And if the enemy has a lot of things that maybe aren't so good for you, you want to try and mitigate that as well. But again, you have to deploy so that no more than your units can't be more than 6 inches away from each other. As well, and at least 2 others there, so that's actually a key thing there. So you're definitely going to be bunched up a little bit. The nice thing is, again, the defender deploys first, you get to see everything they do, and you as the Briton player get the first phase as well. So you can definitely and should probably be the aggressor here to sort of keep the enemy from moving and deploying and sort of getting out of their kind of smaller deployment zone here. So if you're the aggressor, you can already take some key spots on the field here, and first turn charges, again, they're theoretically possible here if you're 18 inches apart and all that, but you don't necessarily just want to go recklessly and charge in here depending on what your opposing player is fielding. But again, being the aggressor and sort of I would say at least taking up to midfield, and sort of boxing the defender in is definitely going to be a good way for you to go there. But again, it all depends on what you're bringing, what the defender is even playing, any other special character rules, talents, and all that other stuff, and then obviously the way the board is set up too. So and again, just because the defender has to lay out all their stuff first doesn't necessarily give you that much of an advantage. It's just there's certain factors sometimes it can be, but if you got a really competent player as the defender, they might deploy in such a way that you really can't take advantage of it, or maybe their army is just actually not a good matchup for the Britons. So there's lots of things to consider there. But if you've as the Briton players feel that the defender maybe didn't deploy so well, is maybe not so experienced, you can definitely take advantage of that. And like I said, be aggressive. And a lot of people don't know how to react to something like that if they're staring down a full army about to be on top of them. So a lot of more inexperienced players tend to sort of panic and can't deal with all of that stuff that's going on at once. So, but enough about the deployment here. Special rules. Before the battle begins, the warriors of Britain will attempt to intimidate their enemies at the start of the first turn before any model performs an action. Every defending unit must make a bravery check. If the Briton player has deployed more models than the defending player, which should be easy, you're playing Britons, it's more of a horde army, these checks are made with a -1 penalty on top of everything. Any unit that fails its bravery check will suffer a -1 penalty to all melee and bravery checks it makes during the battle. So that's huge. So, especially if the defender doesn't have a good leadership or bravery stat across their army, that can be pretty damn crippling. Again, Britons tend to be a horde army, so you can certainly outnumber most opposing forces. That's pretty huge there. So for the whole battle, not just for like the first turn or a couple turns or something like that. So a -1 penalty to melee and bravery is pretty damn brutal, and that can make up for some of the shortcomings of the British or the Britain army again that we've looked at in the faction review series. But that's pretty damn powerful there. So now again. You probably will be, as the defender, testing at a -1 penalty again, assuming that you're outnumbered. But again, a lot of armies do have some excellent leadership out there. So things like the Spartans, and with hero setups where that they can sort of convey their bravery bonus and all that stuff in a bubble to units around them. So that -1 penalty might not mean much, but again, armies that don't have good leadership or heroes aren't maybe deployed properly, or where the heroes aren't necessarily spreading that bravery bonus out to their fellow units, that is where things will be crippling. And will definitely make it an uphill battle for the defending player. In a mirror match, it could be interesting. I mean, both sides will definitely have a lot of dudes on the table here, but a fellow British force that would have to suffer from the -1 melee and bravery, especially once their unit sizes start dropping and all that, with the typical warrior special rules and all that we've seen, that will definitely be a rough and bloody battle. And then how do we actually win this? So the fight continues until all the models in one warband have been removed, either through injury or failure to will a fight. The warband is the victor. So it's basically a kind of kill 'em all mission, but they've definitely dressed this one up with some nice special rules here. And again, certainly in favor of the Britain players. A lot of the missions that we've seen with the Athenians, definitely there was a little bit of a favor towards the Athenians for the most part, but not necessarily as heavy as this one is. So right off the bat, if you're playing a campaign and you're the Britons and you definitely want to have a better shot of winning your next game, for campaign purposes and all that, this is a good one to try and snag an opponent for. They're going to be in for a rough time. So Terror of the Tribes is definitely aptly named here. So if you're the defending player, what can you do to deal with this? So ideally, if you're not packing an army that's good with bravery and leadership and all that, hopefully you have some heroes that can be deployed so that they can spread out their and hopefully you've taken the talents that let you do that, but sort of spreading out their bravery bonuses and all that stuff. If you have just a rock solid bravery type army, very good units and stuff like that, hopefully you won't fail too many of these, and kind of get through that opening thing relatively unscathed. But yeah, if your whole army has failed that check, you're going to be in for a rough time. But deploying in such a way, obviously you have less space than them. So, and again, depending on how the table's set up, so you don't want to make any mistakes here. I think rushing out and trying to charge the British is definitely a little bit risky, especially, you're probably going to be outnumbered, so you don't want to leave yourself vulnerable. But, depending on how the terrain's set up, you might look for certain spots that you can kind of get into relatively fast. Again, they're going to have the first turn. Get into, use those as strong points to defend, and then kind of, I would say probably angle your forces a little bit to not open up like a flank or anything for the British to get into, and then just kind of weather the storm. Again, their general lack of armor is always going to be the Achilles heel for this type of an army. So if you can weather that initial storm, start whittling them down, and then kind of go on the offensive there. But yeah, this is definitely a rough mission for the defender. So so that is that first mission. Again, join us in the next two where we take a look at Wrath of Britons and Peace Between Enemies. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. Hit that like button if you can, and subscribe if you haven't already, and then stay tuned for more.